Welcome to the Bethel Church Sermon of the Week. We hope you enjoy this message by Pastor Eric Johnson. For more information about this podcast and other resources, visit bethel.com.
All right, well, we're gonna continue a series that we started on in January, and many of you know this. Some of you might not be aware of it, but 2018 was quite a rough year for me. I had a crash, and it was just a bad year for me. And if you want the full story, you can go listen to. It was actually Christmas Sunday message, which is a little interesting to kind of talk about your worst year of your life. But the Lord told me, He said, that was my Christmas gift to you. So I think, well, if it's my Christmas gift, it is now your Christmas gift. So it's on Christmas Sunday. I share the story, but my breakthrough it was most of last year. It was in a really dark night of the soul. And early December, I had a significant breakthrough. And the Lord began to talk to me after I came out of that season. He said, Eric, I want you to wake up in the morning and I want you to say, hello, future, it's nice to meet you. So I would wake up in the morning and I'd say, hello, future, it's nice to meet you. Little did I know that would actually kick off a series that we're now 5 weeks in. And it's been, for me, if you're not having fun, it doesn't matter to me. I'm having a lot of fun. And so I know it's been fun. I've been having fun interacting with a lot of you just around this. But I want to give a quick, I can't cover all 5 weeks in review. That would be a waste of time. But I want to give you the concept why it's titled Hello Future. It's important to understand that we as believers, whether you want a future or not, you have one. In about 5 seconds, you're about to meet your future. In 2 days, you're going to meet your future. We all have a future, whether we want it or not. And this is important. So we've covered quite a bit of things. We talked about the concept of time. Why time is fascinating, because there's a biblical Christian view of time that is different from Eastern mysticism. The biblical view of time, the Bible describes it as a road. It's a journey. We're going somewhere. It's not linear in a flat sense, but it's linear in a point A to point B or point whatever. And that's important because the way we have to understand this, because as believers, if you really like occupying a space for the rest of your life, you just signed up for God to completely dismantle your life to get you to move forward. I love fighting for something than occupying it for a season, but I'm smart enough now to go, yeah, okay, God, where's the next frontier that you want us to go after? Why? Because that's the biblical view of time. We're going somewhere. And every time Jesus said, follow me to the disciples, he left. He kept going. He didn't stop. So this is important because Eastern mysticism communicates something almost the very opposite. It communicates time through an endless circle, an endless cycle. So this is where you get incarnation, reincarnation, and if you do well in this lifetime, you're reincarnated into something better. If you don't do good in this lifetime, you're reincarnated into an animal or a stone or something. And the whole idea is you never end. Your life just goes on and on and on and on. And I've learned something, and that's the Eastern mysticism view of time. I want to ask you a question. Do you know anybody in your life that likes going around the same mountain for the rest of your life? No one does. Why? Because we weren't designed that way. We were designed to go somewhere. This is important because everyone has a future, and the Lord will either lead you, pull you, push you, or poke you, or do whatever's necessary to kick you into your future. Now, everyone's life experience will tell us if the Lord led you or if he kicked you. But the end game is this. At the end of the day, you're going to get into your future. So we've been talking about that quite a bit. And then we learned through the life of Moses that Moses, instead of stepping into his promise, which was his future and the nation of Israel, he wanted to make sure that the present was going with them as well. And we learned a valuable lesson a few weeks ago around this, that, I love stepping into promises that God has for me, but I can't do it apart from his presence. And so we talked about that. Now, the last time we talked about this, we talked about the life of Joseph. Now, I need to do a quick overview. Now, if you've not studied Joseph at all, I would encourage you to. It's such a fun story. And it gets weird. There's some weird moments, and it's kind of complex. And, I've read it so many times, and I still get kind of caught in it's an interesting maze of emotions, an interesting maze of incredible family dysfunctions. And if Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50 is the life of Joseph. If you're to look at the context of all of Scripture, that's an amazing amount of real estate dedicated to one man. I mean, Paul, it kind of helped for the Apostle Paul. He wrote 13 books that we know of. And so he occupied a bunch of the New Testament because he wrote it. But when someone else writes about you, and they took time to write about one man named Joseph and took chapter 37 to chapter 50 to talk about one man, I think the Lord's saying, pay attention to this life. Pay attention to how the Lord took Joseph into his future. And so because it's so much material to cover, I'm taking the risk to try to cover his whole life in 2 weeks. We covered mainly the first half a couple weeks ago. You can get that on the podcast. Today, my goal is to at least cover a majority of the second half of his life. And so far this morning, I've been able to, and I hope I can do it in this service. Looks like I have enough time. So we know that Joseph was the youngest son. Now, what we do find out in Scripture, and again, it's debatable. Some of you might be able to really clear this up for me. But in Scripture, it's hard to tell if Benjamin was born, which would be a younger brother, by the time Joseph was sold into slavery. But we do know that Joseph was definitely the youngest or the second to the youngest by the time we pick up his story. So Joseph is the son of Jacob. Now you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Jacob had 12 sons, and Joseph is one of them. Now Jacob had a favorite son. Now you would think that Jacob would break the cycle of favoritism in his family, but he doesn't. He actually perpetuates it. And in fact, Joseph ends up having the same issue later. And it's really fascinating that the very thing that destroyed Jacob's life, he ends up repeating it. And so you have this interesting dynamic of some family dysfunctions and issues, but we know the Lord's good, and he works it out in the end. And that's the amazing part of the story. So Joseph, as a young boy, he's a dreamer. Now, he dreamed, and there's two dreams that the Bible tells us about. One of them is he had the dream that he saw all the sheaves coming to bow down to him. And he tells his older brothers that. And of course, the older brothers, they get mad at him, they get angry at him. And what's interesting is that someone else's dream can sometimes reveal a dysfunction in your own heart. And so Joseph had another dream, and in this dream, the sun, the moon, and the stars bowed down to him. And now we're at the dinner table with the entire family. And Jacob's like, whoa, are you saying I'm bowing down to you? And then it said Jacob kept the matter in his heart. So here we have a young boy who's had two dreams that revealed a dysfunctional family, that they got incredibly jealous, bitter, angry, and so on and so forth. Fast forward, Joseph is now around 17 years old. He's a late teenager, and I have a 17-year-old right now, so I'm trying to picture the mind of a 17-year-old going through what Joseph was about to go through. So the brothers are out in the field working, and Joseph comes out to visit them. And as they see Joseph coming, because of the undealt with bitterness, the undealt with anger toward their younger brother's dreams, they decided they were going to kill him. So their 17-year-old brother comes on the scene, and they get a hold of him, and they're getting ready to kill him. And one of the brothers said, we can't kill him. We can't do that. He's our brother, our own flesh and blood. So they said, let's just throw him in a pit. So they threw him in a pit. So Joseph is now in a pit, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And one of the brothers leaves, said, don't do anything until I get back. So Joseph's in a pit. Well, as they're trying to figure out what to do next, they look up, and they see some slave traders, some human traffickers going by in the distance. And they thought, why don't we sell him to them, get some money, and then we'll just tell our father, Jacob, that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. So they all said, that's a great idea. So they pull him out of the pit, and they sell him to the slave trade, and they take his coat, which was a special coat that his father gave him. They dipped it in goat's blood, and they took it back to their father, and they told the father, Jacob, your son, your favorite son, had been killed in the wilderness by animals. And so Jacob begins to mourn the loss of his favorite son, his youngest son. So while he's mourning the loss of his favorite son, now let's go over to Joseph's life. Joseph ended up in Egypt, which is approximately 200 miles from where he lives. So he's 200 miles removed. They said it takes about 10 days on a donkey or a horse to get from Canaan to Egypt. So now they're in Egypt, and Joseph is sold as a servant to a very wealthy, powerful man named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was a wealthy man. He was quite high in the ranking in the political system. And Joseph had so much favor on his life that Potiphar recognized and said, I want to put you in charge of all of my stuff. It is said that Potiphar said, Joseph took care of all of my matters. All he had to think about was what he wanted to eat that night. So talk about Joseph was elevated to quite a status in this man's house. Well, meanwhile, Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him to sleep with him. And he's resisting. He's like, why would I do that? I've been entrusted by your husband. Long story short, some unfortunate things took place, and Joseph is thrown into a prison and being wrongly and inaccurately accused of trying to sleep or rape Potiphar's wife. So now Joseph, what we're trying to understand here is that Joseph had a future, he had a dream, but every moment he seems to be getting farther and farther away from his future. How many have ever felt that before in life? Like, man, my future is actually not getting closer, it's getting farther. So imagine Joseph, rejected by family, wanted to be killed, sold into slavery. Now he's wrongfully accused of rape and sleeping with someone, and now he's in prison. So while he's in prison, and thankfully the Bible says it, and the Lord was with him. So he's in prison. Two of his inmates have dreams. They wake up the next morning, and the two inmates look at him, and Joseph said, "Are you guys all right?" Because their faces were troubled. "Are you guys all right?" They said, "No, we had a dream last night, and we don't know what the dream means." And Joseph goes, "Well, isn't God the interpreter of all dreams?" And he said, "Tell me your dream." So there's a cupbearer and a baker, and both these guys work for Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh, they did something wrong, so Pharaoh threw him in prison. So they tell him the dream, and Joseph says, "Oh, I know what these dreams are." So he interprets one of them. One of them was, "Oh, in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to pull you back out of prison and going to restore you back to your place in the palace." And the other guy tells him the dream. He said, "Oh, I know what's going to happen to you. You're going to get pulled out of prison, but instead of being restored, he's going to kill you." That's a bad dream. I'd be like, "Can I stay in prison? Is there any way I can stay in prison?" And so sure enough, both interpretations happen. One guy, the baker, gets pulled out, he gets killed, and the cupbearer gets pulled out, and he ends up back in the palace. Well, as the baker and the cupbearer is leaving prison, according to the interpretation of the dream, Joseph, "Hey, don't forget about me. Remember, I'm the guy that interpreted that dream for you. Don't forget about me." And the Bible says the cupbearer went back into the palace and forgotten about Joseph. Now imagine Joseph is getting farther and farther away from his future. And then it's hard to tell how much time goes by. It's anywhere from 1 to 2 years rough that Joseph remains in prison. And he's sitting there and he's like, "I've been forgotten, I've been rejected." The guy is just sinking in life. Then one day, Pharaoh, the man on top of the entire Egyptian empire, has some dreams, and it troubles him. Not only do the dreams trouble him, is that no one in Pharaoh's court can interpret the dreams. So "Hey, who can interpret my dream?" And the guy holding the cup's like, "Oh, I forgot about Joseph. Shoot, I wonder if he's still alive." And so he goes, "Joseph, are you there?" "Yeah, buddy, thanks." So they pull Joseph out, and they clean him up, put him before Pharaoh. And Joseph says, "Pharaoh, tell me your dream." And Pharaoh tells him the dream. And Joseph says, "I know what this dream's about. Egypt is about to experience 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine." What I love about Joseph, he doesn't just interpret a dream. He actually gives them some advice, which is a lot like Daniel. Daniel didn't just go to the line. He actually went past the line and offered himself. And I think a lot of times as believers, we just kind of do the bare minimum. And I think sometimes you just need to offer 1 more inch. And that's where favor will come. And so Joseph does, "Hey, Pharaoh, if I were you, what I would do is I would hire a wise guy to store up enough resources in the 7 years of abundance, so in the 7 years of famine, you can live off of that." And Pharaoh's like, "You're my guy." And what we learned last week is that you're only one text message away from entering into your future. We learned that everyone's future has a back door. Everyone. I guarantee you there's not one person in this room and will listen on Bethel TV and podcast that say, "My life has worked exactly how I planned it." What does that tell you? You had stepped into your future, but God had a back door and he got you there. So while you felt like your future was getting smaller and smaller, God's like, "Nah, one text message will change all of it overnight." So it's important to understand. So anticipate that, expect that, wait for the DMs, wait for the emails, wait for the phone call. Just wait. Set your expectation on, "Man, my future is getting smaller and smaller." But man, all it takes is one moment and I'm right in the middle of it. Yep. So Joseph is now in the height of Egyptian empire. He's the second most powerful man in the Egyptian empire. Talk about resources. Talk about power and authority. So we're going to pick up the story. That's what we covered last week. Now we're going to pick up mostly the second half of Joseph's life. So go with me to chapter 42. Are you guys still with me? You guys are awesome. Thanks for letting me lay a foundation. Now, I'm going to have to be honest with you. There's so much material to cover that I'm just going to hit kind of the main things because it's just way too in-depth, and I don't want to take the next 12 months to unpack the whole story. So chapter 42. Let me make sure I gave you the right, chapter 42. Now, chapter 41 is kind of, I just brought you up to the end of chapter 41. Now, the famine, they're about 2 years into the famine, roughly. There used to be an old saying, for those of you that have lived in Northern California for a long time, there used to be a saying that whenever San Francisco or the Bay Area would have like an economic recession or anything where the economy went downhill, that whenever San Francisco sneezed, Northern California would get the flu. Because what happened there affects here more. And so this is what's happening now. They're in the famine around 2 years, and Egypt is in famine, and so 200 miles away, Jacob and his family are experiencing, they've ran out of food. They're experiencing the flu, if you allow me to use that illustration. So let's go to verse 1 of chapter 42. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his son, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. Let's stop there. Who's Benjamin? Benjamin is Joseph's brother from the same mother. That's almost like a rap song right there. I could almost, not quite. Yeah, I'll try. It would go really bad. I can maybe do country, but I'd rather not. And so Benjamin, now my favoritism thing is something in this family. And he's like, I'm not losing Benjamin. And so he holds Benjamin and sends the other brother. Now let's go to verse 5. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. I want you to make a note of that. Bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Verse 7, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Let's stop right there. Why? Probably because they thought he was dead, but the other thing that's important to note is that Joseph's name had been changed to an Egyptian name. So look at verse 9, the very beginning. Then Joseph remembered the dreams. This is powerful. This is an amazing moment right here. I want to propose to you, I want you to look, this is 22 years after Joseph had been sold into slavery. 22 years. The last time Joseph saw his brothers, they were filled with anger, hate. The murder on them was so evident. That was the last time Joseph saw his brothers. And I want to propose to you, what do you think got Joseph through 22 years of absolute rejection and failure, wrongfully accused, in prison? What do you think? I want to propose to you, I believe it was his dreams. I actually believe that Joseph, the only thing he had in all 22 years was a dream. And it was in this moment, as he saw his brothers bowing down to him, he remembered the dream as a young boy. Oh, I saw this. The wheat sheaves were bowing down to me. The sun and the moon and the stars were, and he remembered the dream, which I think explains why he gets really awkward for the next 2 chapters. He's like, he doesn't know what to do. Imagine being in that moment in Joseph. You have so much power in that moment to just take massive revenge. And he's like, and he didn't know what to do with it, but he held on to his dream. I'm convinced when everything else falls in life, the only thing you have left to get you to your future is your dream. Do you know that your future lives in a dream? Why do you think God gives you dreams? It's not just to say, have fun. No, hang on to it for dear life because you might need it. It might be all that you have to get you to go forward. So Joseph is in prison, completely rejected. Everyone's forgotten him. He's like, man, I remember that dream. The sun, the moon, and the stars were bowing down to me. I have no idea how that's going to happen. Oh, the wheat sheaves, they were bowing down. He held on to a dream. Why do you think Martin Luther King is one of the most powerful people in all of human history? Because he had a dream. When all of society was against him, he said, nope, I have a dream. Have you ever gone back and read that speech? Not listened to it, but read it. It is so beautifully articulated. And I think you and I need to get in our room and articulate our dreams again. Like, Eric, I've been holding on to it for a couple years. Well, 22 years. 22 years he's been holding on to this dream. And in this moment, he recognized, oh, this is it. I want to challenge you. Are you still holding on to your dreams, or have you given up on them? Is anybody alive this morning? Are you still dreaming? Are you still actually have something in front of you? I did a message last year called the Lost Art of Imagination. This is the whole idea. Listen, God gave you an imagination. He gave you the ability to dream, because that's what keeps you getting up every day. And when you stop dreaming, you only think about the moment. Your circumstances, your situation become your focus. But when you have a dream, when you keep it in front of you, you can get through a lot. I want to challenge you. Have you given up on your dreams? Do you have any dreams? Are there dreams that you've laid down, not even put on the shelf, but you put in the garbage disposal and push the button? Some of you have so given up on your dream, you don't even know what they are anymore. And I want to challenge you today, go find your dreams again. Sometimes it may be the only thing that will get you through hell. So he remembered the dream. Go to verse 11. Between 9 and 10, verse 9 and 10, he doesn't know what to do with what he's feeling, so he accused them of being spies. And then in verse 11, look what they say. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Look who's talking. They are honest men. Your servants are not spies. Okay, so we're going to skip over chapter 42. The basic gist of what happened in chapter 42 is this, is that he accused them of spies. He throws them all in prison, all the brothers in prison for about 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, I think Joseph is trying to figure out a way, how do I see my father again, and how do I see my brother Benjamin again? So he goes, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep Simeon in jail, but I'm going to let all the other brothers out, and I'm going to instruct them, next time you come back to buy grain, you have to bring Benjamin, my favorite brother. Now, he doesn't say my favorite brother. He just said, bring back Benjamin. You cannot come back. And so in this moment, and as they're packing up their grain to go home, the money that they paid for the grain, Joseph returned all the money and put it in their bag. It wasn't until on the way home, and by the time they arrived at home, they opened their grain sack and they found all the money. Now they're nervous that they think that Pharaoh, or that Joseph thinks that they stole their money back. And now they're scared. They're even more scared. And all Joseph was doing is extending an act of grace. So that's roughly chapter 42. Now in chapter 43, in verse 1, let's read it again. Let's read it for the first time. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain, which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to him, saying, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Now, there's some interesting stuff that happened in this conversation, even the end of chapter 42, is that they tell Jacob, listen, if we run out of food and we go back to Egypt, we have to bring Benjamin. One of the brothers said, Dad, if we don't do this, if you let us take Benjamin back to Egypt and I don't bring him back, then you can kill my kids. Talk about a dysfunctional family when you're giving the grandpa permission to kill his grandkids. I mean, this is just dysfunction at its finest. And then in chapter 43, Judah's like, we are not going to buy more food unless we can take Benjamin. And so finally, through a long conversation, Jacob said, okay, take him. And he said, if he doesn't make it back, I'm going to die in grief and sorrow. I will die because he's my only favorite son left. And isn't that, are you getting the dysfunction here? Is this... Maybe some of you know a person with that flag. I don't, because I'm the favorite, so I don't know. I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. Look at your neighbor and say, he's completely joking. So chapter 43, the gist of chapter 43 is basically they go back to Egypt with Benjamin. Now remember, Simeon's been in jail the whole time, which they say is about 2 years. You imagine what Simeon's like? Thanks, guys. Seriously, where the heck have you been? We got enough grain, man. It lasted 2 years. We had no reason to come get you. And so they buy more grain, and then Jacob now is interested in his father. And he's also trying to figure out, how do I get Benjamin to stay with me instead of go back to Canaan? So he had this idea. He said, I'm going to take my cup, which was used for different things besides drinking and some other things. He takes his cup and he secretly has it placed in Benjamin's grain sack. And then he said, let them go home. And then he tells his steward, Joseph tells the steward that when they get the way off, I want you to go and I want you to find my cup that I placed in there in Benjamin's sack. So sure enough, some time goes by, the steward runs up and the brother's like, oh, sorry, what did we do wrong? And one of you stole the cup. No, we didn't take your cup. Why would we steal your cup when we returned all the money they're just like trying to reconcile this. And so they start opening the grain sack, and sure enough, Joseph's cup is in Benjamin's sack, which was placed appropriately. And so they said, Benjamin, you got to come back. You are now the slave of Joseph. The brothers about lose it. And this is about the end of chapter 44. They're like flipping out. Remember, because Reuben's like, my 2 boys are going to be killed now. Remember, he said, Dad, if we don't bring him back, you can kill my son. So Reuben's like wrestling with that. And then Judah's like, and so now this is a massive issue, and they're freaking out. So by the time you get to the end of chapter 44, you run into this part of the story where they are pleading with Joseph, with the steward, to not keep Benjamin. They said, if you keep Benjamin, our father Jacob is going to die in grief and sorrow. And this is where we pick up in chapter 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Verse 3, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Let's stop right there. Oh, this is so good. I love this story. Okay, chapter 41, flip back a page. I want you to look at something with me. Verse 51 of chapter 41. Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for God had made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. This is fascinating to me. So here we have, sometime before, remember Joseph's out of prison, he has some kids, and he named one of them, I have forgotten my path, I've forgotten all my years of hardship, and God had blessed me. Joseph thought he took care of pain. It wasn't until he's standing in front of his brothers and realized he's about to lose himself. I want to propose you sometime, anything that's not resolved in your path, there sometimes comes a moment where it's going to come back to the surface. You can name your kid after a season, but if you've not dealt with it in your heart, there's going to be a moment in your future where it's going to come back, and it's an amazing moment. So picture that Joseph now falls apart in front of them. He's been hiding in pain and tears for the last couple chapters. He hid in the king's chamber. He ate a dinner where he didn't eat with them. I mean, he'd been avoiding them seeing him. And in this moment, he breaks in this moment. Talk about a man that chose grace over revenge. In this moment, he had to choose, what do I do? Do I choose grace or do I choose revenge? We love revenge. I don't know about you, but revenge feels so good. And if I'm the only one that's honest, then that's fine. But how many, we love revenge? This is why we love movies like Count of Monte Cristo. If you've not seen that, I didn't tell you to watch it, but it's a great movie. My wife loves that movie. And I'm like, why do you like revenge that much? I'm like, should we have a sozo? I mean, I think you need a sozo, honey. I mean, she loves the Count of Monte Cristo. It is like the perfect revenge movie. It feeds every revenge button you have. It fills every revenge tank you had. Like, oh man, that feels so good. I'm so glad that guy got his revenge. And we love movies like Double Jeopardy. That's another great movie of revenge. But we have something called Christian revenge. We don't like to stab people in the face. We like to give them a hug and give them a poke in the back. This is what we do, because we all have this need for revenge. We're like, hi, oh, I'm so sorry. And we just, please, I forgive you. I give you. We like to just insert a little bit more power, just a little. The world might do this much, but we Christians, we just do just enough. So it can be easily not seen. And we feel good. Like, have you ever had a parent where the mom says, apologize, I'm sorry. Forgive him, I forgive you. How many know that's not for the kids? That's for the parent. The parent goes, yeah, okay, I feel better about my parenting. And we just, that is not how it's supposed to work. It is in that moment where Joseph had a true emotion of grace. We're so good at saying, I forgive you. And then we distance ourselves from that person for the remainder of our life. That's called revenge. That's revenge in grace form. We just love to, and this is an issue we've got to resolve in our hearts today. Are you revenging on someone, or are you giving grace? And in this moment, the second most powerful man in the Egyptian empire, can you imagine the resources he had to get revenge on his brothers? He could have made their life horrible. He could have tortured them slowly over the course of the rest of their life. If you've ever studied ancient civilization or had the privilege to travel to older parts of the world, and you go to the castles and temples, sometimes in the very depths of those buildings, there were dungeons. And in those dungeons were torture chambers. I visited one last year, and they had saws. They had contraption to basically stretch someone so much so that the arms are ripped off. It's just unbelievable. Joseph had access to all of that. He had access to any resource to take out revenge on him, but yet he chose not to. He chose to extend grace. We're sitting in the throes of Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and Easter. I want to tell you, are you revenging on people, or are you giving them grace? Well, they hurt me. They stabbed me. I know. If anybody had a reason to get revenge, it's this guy. And this is before the cross. I think Joseph is actually a Christ figure, if you will. If you allow me to have liberty to say that. He's a form of a Christ in the Old Testament in that he chose grace over revenge. This is before the cross. This is astounding. This is absolutely astounding. So he chose grace. What's cool about that part, as he gives grace, Pharaoh gets wind of what's happening. Now, what I don't know, the Bible doesn't seem to clarify this for me. I couldn't find it at least, and that is, I don't know if when Pharaoh hired Joseph, if they sat down and had like a life story moment. Hey, tell me your life story. Take me back to your childhood, and I want to hear all. I don't know if that was common practice then. I doubt it. Maybe. I don't know. But what we do know, when Joseph gives grace to his family, Pharaoh goes, oh, that's awesome. And what Pharaoh does next is awesome. So as Joseph gives grace, Pharaoh interviews the family. He says, hey, what are you guys good at? And they said, we're good at farming. We're good at toiling the land. We're good at taking care of flock. That's awesome. You guys take over that chunk of the land and you live there for the rest of your life. That's all yours. So while Joseph gave grace, Pharaoh gives favor and abundance. This is very kingdom. This is very kingdom right here. When you and I receive the grace of Jesus Christ, guess what comes next? Favor, abundant, blessing. Why? Because that's the kingdom. And it's even demonstrated in the Old Testament, way before the cross. Imagine Jesus on the cross. He had every resource available to have revenge on the ones that were killing him, but he chose grace instead. And I want to challenge us today. Do you have grace? Or are you getting your Christian revenge? Are you getting the needle poke just enough to make you feel better about it? Or are you being completely graceful in your actions? Eric, you don't know what they've done to me. I don't either, but I'm looking at the story of Joseph, and that guy had a pretty high standard of grace. Pretty high standard of grace. So I'll leave you with this. He chose grace over revenge. Why don't you stand? Thank you, Jesus. How many received this word today? Remember, your future is in a dream. Hold on to it for dear life. Do not let go of it, ever. Hold on to that dream because it will be the very thing that will get you through everything that life throws at you. And remember, your future has a back door, and then to choose grace over revenge.
Thanks for listening to the Sermon of the Week. This weekly podcast is being translated into multiple languages. Please visit podcasts.ibethel.org.